Today I'm going to be talking about light bread. This is what I call light bread. Other people may call it loaf bread, white bread, sandwich bread, called by different things, but we always call it light bread. Now, before I actually get into the rest of the video, I will start by saying I know that light bread is not healthy for you. It's not a good bread to eat. But on the other hand, it is a bread that has a lot of history in the Appalachian Mountains, and I'm sure beyond that, but I can only speak to Appalachia. But it is part of our Appalachian Foodways and used in such a variety of ways that I would really be remiss if I didn't talk about it, even though I know well and good that it's not very healthy for you. Now, when I was growing up, light bread was part of something that Granny and Pat bought every week. But in their lifetimes, when they were children, it was not very common. In those days, and even prior to that, what most folks ate for bread in the Appalachian Mountains was cornbread. And that was because most people grew corn. So that was something that they had, that they could dry, and then they would take to their local mill and get ground into meal to make cornbread and other things with, cornmeal mush. But it was very common in those days for people to eat cornbread at least twice a day, if not three. They would eat it with meals, of course. Then you can use leftover cornbread for the wonderful cornbread and milk, whether you like sweet milk or buttermilk. People in the Appalachian Mountains in certain areas did also grow wheat, but it just wasn't as prevalent as corn. Now, if you're following along with Alex Stewart, you will know, and he notes that in his book, in one of the parts where he's talking about his grandpa, one of his grandpas, not the other one, but one of them, actually grew wheat and had biscuits every morning. And Alex was excited when he got to go there to help him to work or whatever, because they would have biscuits, and that was like a rare treat. But as time went on and things change like they do, you know, we can't stop changes, and people become more dependent on those grocery stores and supermarkets and those kind of things to get their bread as they took jobs outside the home, they lost their land where they grew corn on, all those, the whole industrial revolution, all those things that changed, and people become more dependent on actually buying their bread. And that's when light bread, white bread, loaf bread, whatever you call it, actually come to really be part of the Appalachian Foodways. And I would say over that time of all those different changes, the type of bread that you actually buy in the store, like what I buy today, I buy Sunbeam every week. So a lot of you notice it sitting back there behind me, but it changed as well. I know Pat would often kind of mourn the fact that the bread, light bread that he ate, if Granny bought some and he was making a sandwich, that it tasted nothing like the light bread that he bought when he was younger. Even probably when I was a child, it had changed from then till in between those two times. But he would often kind of mourn that, especially in his last years. I heard him, he asked me more than once if I knew where I could get some decent light bread, and I made him bread. We make bread. I have a video on how we make bread, and I would make him some of that and take it to him. But he really noted the difference in it, and I'm sure some of you have done that as well if you've been a fan of light bread for any length of time. I wanted to quickly read to you, though, out of the Southern Dictionary of Southern Appalachian English, the entry for light bread. Again, it's common to hear it called that in this area. Light bread, noun, bread made from wheat flour leavened with yeast, distinguished from heavier bread such as biscuit and cornbread. See also loaf bread and wheat bread. 1833, supper was light bread and butter. That was in Burke County, North Carolina. 1861, Painter, Civil War letters, August 22nd. We are faring very well. We get light bread and bacon and rice and dried apples, coffee, beef, and sugar. So that was talking about what they'd been given to eat, I guess. 1864, Chapman, Civil War letters, May 10th. We draw flour, crackers, light bread, sugar, and coffee, soap, candles, beans, vinegar, bacon, beef, pickled pork, pepper. And that was interesting, again, talking about what they got to eat. 1915, Dingus word list. In Virginia, it was ordinary bread made with yeast, distinguished from biscuit. 1949, Curith word geography. In the South and the South Midland, light bread is the usual designation for bread made from wheat and yeast, and this compound word is encountered up to the Pennsylvania line. 1966, Darkin, vocabulary Ohio River Valley. Kentucky was light bread everywhere, but in this state where cornbread was and is more commonly eaten. 1968, Wilson Folklore, Mammoth Cave, any yeast-raised bread to distinguish it from biscuit. 1982, Wheels, Cove Lumber, the flour milling did not prove profitable. Cornbread was the bread of that time and place, and there was not yet much demand for light bread. 1990, Fisher, Preacher Stories. In the economy of the mountains, most people ate cornbread at least twice a day. Wheat bread, as it was sometimes called, was usually reserved for breakfast and many times only for special occasions, especially if it had yeast in it, in which case it was called light bread. 1995, Williams, Smoky Mountain Folklife. Breads made from white flour, either homemade biscuits or store-purchased light bread, were more prestigious than cornbread. And then 2016, Netherlands, Appalachian Cooking, folks didn't make yeast breads nearly as often as quick breads and cornbread, but when we did, they seemed special. Any baked yeast loaf bread was called light bread. In fact, any loaf bread purchased at the local store or supermarket we called light bread. So lots of information there from the Dictionary of Southern Appalachian English, and you can kind of see how in different places, especially way back there in 1833, how it was. Wouldn't you have liked to have had some of that bread? Because you know that was just yeast bread made there at home, or in the case of the Civil War soldiers, I'm not sure where they would have made it. But that would have certainly been a better bread probably than what we're getting today, like Pap had experienced. But very interesting as you go through. So you may say, well, why in the world do they even call it light bread? Why call it light bread? Well, when you think about the denseness of cornbread compared to the kind of airy lightness of a piece of light bread, you can kind of see that that's how it easily become called that. Now, some of these entries kind of make it sound like maybe biscuits were called that, but I've never heard biscuits called that. But if you were back in those early days when you didn't have the store-bought like I do, you can kind of see that maybe they would have called biscuits or any kind of bread like that light bread compared to cornbread. So the most popular brands of light bread when I was growing up here in the southern mountains of Appalachia was definitely Sunbeam and Kearns. Now, I don't ever see Kearns anymore. Maybe if you do in your area, you can tell me about it. And then also Bunny Bread and Wonder Bread. Those were kind of the ones that I would see. Of course, there's a lot of the local grocery stores have their own brand. There's those. But probably the most common ones or popular ones in my family at least were definitely Sunbeam and Kearns. Now, back in the day when I was a little girl, that was before they would actually print the date, like Best By date, on the bags. And I remember people in this area trying to kind of break the code of Kearns, because depending on what color of twist tie, so if you could tell how old or how fresh the bread was. So that's another thing that's changed over that time period, even in my lifetime. Another interesting thing when I think about those growing up in those the different Kearns or Sunbeam or whatever it was, Bunny Bread, was the bags, the actual bags that the bread come in. We would save those. Lots of people did that, so you would save it. And then somebody might say, well, you got a bread bag handy and I'll put this in it if they were going to take something. Ziploc bags and all those kind of things wasn't as common in those days, but those bread bags come in really handy. Of course, you can still do that today. You can still use reuse bags like that, whether it's a bread bag, especially nicer, like things that are like cereal or something comes in. I save those if we ever have anything like that. We don't eat as much cereal now as we did when the girls was little, but those are good to wrap meat in or something if you're going to put it in the freezer. Also, I eat a lot of almonds, so I save the bags the almonds come in, and I put vegetables or different things in them to put in the freezer. But I remember the bread bags, though, that we used those a lot, and we actually have a bread bag and just stuff the other bread bags in there, and then when you needed them, you'd get one out. Just for a variety of different things that they'd be used for. But probably my most favorite memory is how Pap would use them when he would go fishing. So if him and Steve and Paul went fishing and they come home with some fish, they would Pap would fillet them or do clean them and do all that, and then he would put them in one of those bread bags, and then he would fill it with water and then tie off the top. So then when it froze, it was kind of like the fish was suspended in that water inside the bread bag. So that's just a great memory for me. Now, as I said at the beginning, I understand that it's not that healthy for you, but it is still something that's part of our diet because it's one of those foods that we grew up with and grew up eating. Now, as I said about the healthy part, and I do make homemade bread, which is healthier, than what I'm buying in the store, but there's another bread that I'm really interested in, another type of bread that I'm interested in making, and it's supposed to be the healthiest bread. And I learned about it from the homesteading pastor, from Robbie Lynn, from Pastor Lon's wife, Robbie Lynn. And she got really interested in it, just trying to find a more healthy way to feed her family, of course, to be better, be healthy. But also, it has a long storage life, so that's another plus. And a lot of you probably are already aware of this, but it's wheat berries. So you get the wheat berries and you grind them yourself. And by grinding them and then making the bread, it retains all the nutrients. So I have the berries. I even have a grinder, but I have yet to find the time to actually make it. But that's definitely something that I'm interested in. So Robbie Lynn has some great videos about it. You can jump over there and watch her videos. But if you have any tips, like if you're familiar with wheat berries and you've been using them for years and all that, please leave a comment and share some of your knowledge. And that's certainly something that I want to try to do for my family, for the healthy part, plus it's really tasty, they say, and also the long storage. Those wheat berries are easy to store. If you keep them dry and all that, they will kind of last indefinitely, so that's an added plus for sure. And I'm really a bread lover. Often I would rather have the bread than whatever else is on the plate. Like I adore cornbread. If you've been watching my videos, you know that about me. I just adore it. I love cornbread. I love biscuits. I love Sunbeam, but I love homemade bread too. My homemade bread recipe that Miss Cindy taught me so many years ago, I love that. I'm just a real bread person, and I really like it. I don't eat large amounts of it other than the cornbread. I guess I do eat a lot of it, but it is something that I really like, so I've always been interested in it, whether it's the kind of the food ways of the light bread that's not so healthy for you, those wonderful tradition of serving cornbread here in the Appalachian Mountains, or kind of this newfangled, I guess I'd say, way of making bread like Robbie Lynn. So in the coming weeks, I'm going to share some of my favorite light bread recipes. Some of those, they're all really simple. They're kind of like make-do kind of foods, other than, of course, you do have to buy the bread. But years ago, kind of around 2008, 2009, in that economic downturn that we had then, I just started the Blind Pig and the Acorn, and I went through a spell of really writing about different ways to save money and different ways of looking at things, and about some of the make-do kind of foods that we would eat that would save you money. And there were several, about light bread. That was the kind of the theme when I would ask other people to talk about their ways, that light bread would always come up, whether it was a scrambled egg sandwich or making hamburger gravy and putting it over a slice of toast, all those kind of simple ways. So I hope to share some of those with you in the coming weeks, and I hope you'll drop back by for those. And if you have any ways that you used light bread kind of in an economical way, or a comfort food like for me, having grown up on it, I just can't imagine a sandwich without, like a banana sandwich. I gotta have the light bread. But please share anything like that in the comments. And if you're really interested in light bread and thinking about those old standby brands like Sunbeam, I've noticed on YouTube you can find Kern's commercials. So maybe you'll remember the one about the trucker, that the truck driver was always trying to get to the diner where Mavis was at with his, whether it was a load of Kern's pies or wheat bread or buns for his burger or whatever. He was always, he had to face the rain and all these different things. You can find those old commercials on YouTube, and it's kind of really nostalgic to go back and look at them. As always, I hope you'll drop back by often and help me celebrate Appalachia, which is a whole lot of Appalachian foodways, and which definitely does include eating light bread.